Chronic stress causes diabetes, not contributes, not makes it a little worse. It actually causes it. And we're going to talk about every single kind of stress that nobody in medicine is naming. We're going to go over the ways that stress shows up in your life, the many different ways it shows up, what it actually means for your health. I'm going to share a little bit about a patient that I've been working with, a woman coaching client actually that I've been working with. And then I'm going to talk to you about the things that you can do to help manage your stress in a way that is meaningful and transformational. So I'm Dr. Jen. Welcome to Friday Morning Live. Joyful Medicine with Dr. Jen. I am Dr. Jennifer Davis. I'm board certified in pediatrics, pediatric critical care, and lifestyle medicine. And I help adults and families transform their metabolic health with joyful medicine that honors their lives, their culture, and their humanity. This is where evidence-based lifestyle medicine meets joy, community, and everyday living. So let's talk about stress because I talk to patients every single day and I always ask about stress and how they manage stress, but also, if they have stress. And often either they say that they have stress many different ways, and I go into the details because that's really important is understanding exactly what's going on in my patients' lives, which is why I do lifestyle medicine because I can take that time and really get granular, right? Really understand what's going on because this has a direct effect, which is what we're going to talk about. But often, we are juggling many different things and we don't often recognize that stress is having an effect unless you know, we think about it, unless it's disruptive, unless it's causing something obvious. If we feel our heart racing or we are immediately in danger. But there's all this low level stress that we're exposed to every single day, and it takes a toll. The other thing is sometimes people say they don't have stress or they don't realize that they have stress. And then I talk about how to manage it. And we'll talk about that at the end. So stay to the end so I give you some practical tips on how to manage stress. So let's talk about, I'm particularly talking about stress this month because April is Stress Awareness Month, but also because diabetes is epidemic. And often the conventional wisdom is to unfortunately blame the patient, blame the person for developing diabetes, for developing the conditions that associates with diabetes, also for weight. And we often associate our weight with illness, and it's not necessarily weight. It's not weight. Our focus on weight is misplaced, and that is one of the stressors that people come to me with all the time. This that they've been told year after year, every time they go to the doctor, whatever their issue is, whatever the reason that they're seeing their doctor for, is that their weight is the problem, and that if they just lose weight, then that'll make things better. And that's actually harmful. And I will tell you that that focus on weight, this weight cycling that we do, actually ends up in developing metabolic disease. And people that may not have metabolic disease to begin with, but if they do have an underlying chronic metabolic condition, this weight cycling, when we focus on weight, we tend to lose weight and regain it. And that causes stress on our body. It induces visceral fat, which leads to metabolic disease. So this weight cycle, that's one problem. So let's talk about what chronic stress does to your body first. So chronic stress puts us in this fight or flight state, which is a natural state that our body has to be able to fight off, whatever we're dealing with. Maybe we're being chased by a bear. We need to be able to summon all of our energy and to be able to fight this bear. So our body releases glucose so that we have that energy ready in our muscles to go, right? So cortisol is released, which tells our liver to let go of glucose so that we can fight this bear. It also elevates our heart rate. It elevates our blood pressure. And so think about it. If we are chronically stressed, this is what's going on. It also increases inflammation in our bodies, which also leads to chronic disease later down the line. And see, the thing is, our body responds the same way if we are fighting a bear or if we're responding to a notification on the phone or some of these other things that I'm going to talk about now. And so this is a physiologic problem. It is not a personal problem. It is not a moral failing. It is our body responding as it's meant to respond to stress because this is a natural occurrence. So this is why somebody that has prediabetes or maybe even doesn't have diabetes can end up with an elevated hemoglobin A1C even if they are eating all the right things, if they're doing all of the right things, because we can't disconnect our body from our mind. So our mind is responding to the stressor and it is sending signals to our body that we need to deal with this stressor. So in spite of what we're eating, our body may be releasing glucose, which is going to elevate our blood sugar. And if it stays chronically elevated over time, coupled with this inflammation and this ongoing stress, this can lead to problems down the line. And this is really important. Cortisol does many other things in the body. It causes our body to store fat because we are stressed. So we need to make sure that we are storing energy so that we are able to maintain ourselves for a long time. And so this again is another way that stress can show up in our bodies. So let's talk about all of the ways that we are encounter stress during our days. So there are stressors throughout our days. Stress is a normal part of life, right? The problem is when we are confronted with stress that either is is unrelenting, is there present all the time, or we cannot escape it. And, we'll talk about that. But so some of the stressors that we don't talk about enough is the shame around weight. So that's what I opened with is that often when women come to me, they have been told year after year that they need to just lose weight and their prediabetes will get better, their diabetes will get better, their knee pain will get better, their, headaches everything will get better if you just lose weight. And that's simply false for many reasons. But additionally, this is causing additional stress. So every time this is something that weighs on us, right? That we just need to lose weight. And that constant aggravation and irritation and shame is a physiologic stressor. And so this again can cause our nervous system to just be constantly stimulated and result in this cortisol response that I talked about. The stress of the medical counter itself. As Black women, as Black people navigating the healthcare system, we are often unheard, not respected, not listened to, and it can be a very stressful encounter. And some of that causes us to avoid care when we should be getting care. It causes us to avoid going to the doctor or being heard by the doctor, and that itself, being in that situation, is another stressor. The other one is this perfection trap. So this idea, kind of led by this idea that there is some perfect way to eat, some perfect body type, this constant need to have exactly the right number of macros, exactly the right number of calories, this idea that if you can't do it perfectly well, then you're doing it wrong. And that is simply wrong because life is meant to be lived and our lives change every single day and our ability to be resilient and adapt is important. So that rigidity, that idea that perfection is the goal is harmful. It causes stress, but it also causes us to avoid doing the things that can actually be helpful. And it actually, when you look at what causes change over time, it's those small, consistent steps. It's not those big changes. It's not that perfection. It's that foundation and then just repeated daily over time. So if that perfection is keeping you avoiding making changes, time to like rethink that and maybe think of a different approach. Another one that I kind of touched on is systemic racism, and this is a real big issue for the our population. Stress has been shown. There have been multiple studies, but most recently, the Black Women's Health Products Project demonstrated that chronic stress in Black women results in a shortened lifespan, results in worse chronic disease and cardiovascular disease and metabolic dysfunction. So this is not something obviously that can be avoided. We cannot avoid racism. It's built into the system, but being aware that this is something that is present and that it is taking a toll can let us take steps to manage that stress. And that is so, so important. So by not naming it, by not recognizing it, we often avoid it. We don't address it. And that is really the key. So the first step is recognizing that there is stress, that your body has stress. And then the next step is figure out ways to manage. And I'll talk to you about, I had a patient, a coaching client recently who has been going through this. I have many coaching clients, like I said, that have this same scenario of feeling shame and stress around their weight or around recommendations that have been made in this wellness culture that we live in. So One of my clients recently has been doing everything right, had been following, what her doctor had said, low carb, exercising, going to the gym, got a trainer, was doing all of the things, trying to optimize her sleep, but we'll get to that in a moment. Um, but she nothing was budging, right? Her weight actually had increased. Her hemoglobin A1C was stuck, and she was heading towards adding medication. And the thing is, this had been going on for decades, for this struggle with her weight had been going on for decades. The hemoglobin A1C, and insulin prediabetes had been more recent, but this effort to improve it had been going on for months. And so joining the program, that I help people with, I we talk about the actual things that we should be focused on, which is not a diet, which is not, some rigid prescriptive program. It's more a pattern, a way of living that supports, your joy, your lived experience, and incorporating these daily habits. But more importantly is the stress. So when we peeled back the layers, a big part of it was, her stress from running a business, from having a family to young children to manage, from this constant pressure to be perfect. And when we talked about all of these things and we started to address these things and started to talk about ways to cope with stress in a way that is meaningful and transformative, things started to change. So just a few tweaks in diet, but really that overall approach, it's really if you're facing it day after day after day without addressing it, it really takes a toll. So just by starting to incorporate some simple techniques and also the mindset around stress and around her life help lower her stress. And so those things were transformative. But, the thing is she when she finally realized this, she really was so, um, relieved that it was, transformative for her, and that is really important that knowing that we actually have the power to make a change, and often the focus on the wrong thing can be the thing that gets in our way. So stress, let's talk about number one, how stress shows up in our body. I talked about the ways that stress, is around us, but how does it show up in our body? What signs may we see? So one of the most common things, especially as women, especially as we go through perimenopause, is we have a problem with our sleep. And stress elevates our cortisol, and this elevated cortisol can affect our sleep. Poor sleep can elevate our cortisol, so we get on this cycle. So poor sleep is definitely a sign of stress. If you find that you're waking in the middle of the night, it might be related to a stress response. Um, Digestive problems. Often, maybe we have bloating, we have discomfort, we have constipation, we have abdominal pain. That can be a that can be a sign of stress. Maybe you have headaches. Maybe you're irritable. Maybe you are unable to concentrate well. That's another one that I see often. These are all can be signs of stress. But you know what? Beyond that, recognizing the stress, the way stress may show up in your body, but even beyond that. So being able to cope with the stress that we're faced with, but even beyond that is having a daily practice that helps regulate your nervous system and reset your nervous system so that when we are faced with this daily stress that our response is not as intense. And now this doesn't happen overnight, but it is again one of those practices that done regularly over time will again help lower, it kind of rewires your brain to how you respond to stress and how your body responds to stress. And that's important. So it is the daily practice of mindfulness or stress reducing activities that is the key. And that is for everybody because as much as we think that maybe we aren't stressed, I used to think that myself. I never thought that the brain and the body were connected, but clearly they are. And sometimes it takes years to see the effects, but it really does have an effect. So, what are some of the things that you can really do? So, we often talk about meditation. Meditation absolutely is powerful over time, it literally does rewire your brain, but maybe you're like me and you're like, "I can't sit still. I don't have time for this." There are other things that you can do. Simple breath work is one of my favorite things. It's one of the things I taught my children, early on. One of my favorite ones is box breathing. where you breathe kind of in a box. Basically, you breathe in for 4 counts, you hold it for 4 counts, you breathe out for 4 counts, you hold it again for 4 counts, and if you do 3 to 5 cycles of that, you will feel it. You'll notice that your heart rate is lower. You will feel calmer. I should see one of my the first things I tell people, often women that I'm talking to, especially in my practice and even in my coaching practice, is to just stop. Often we feel like we have to rush to the next thing, that we're always behind, that everything's an emergency, everything has the same urgency. And the first step is to just pause and just recognize that nothing is really an emergency. There's not a bear chasing you. Nobody's dying. It's okay to take your time. And that pause in itself will immediately start to reset your system. So maybe you pause and then you do the box breathing together. Those two together are really good. So recognizing, taking those pauses, I like to call it savoring the moment, which is the key to the way that meditation works is it's bringing your mind present. And so I like to use little joy breaks or joy snacks or savoring moments, I like to call them. So when you actually take a moment to truly just savor the moment so that you're fully present in that moment and you feel it fully. So one way you can do it is I love to tune into nature too, but maybe you step outside and you feel the sun on your body. Maybe you feel the breath on the wind on your body. Maybe you take a few minutes and watch a bird or a butterfly or a bee that immediately we respond to the cycles of nature. We are connected innately to nature. We are wired to respond physiologically to nature. Birds in particular, actually bird song, if you like bird song, I love listening to birds, but that actually naturally um, makes stimulates our vagus nerve. It stimulates our parasympathetic system and it calms us because we're meant to respond. When birds sing, that means that we're safe. Other things you can do, I love to do like a mindful cup of coffee or a mindful cup of tea. So where what I always say is I start the morning with my coffee. I love the whole practice of making my coffee, of grinding the beans, smelling the beans, um, setting up the coffee pot, that first sip, feeling the warmth of the mug, just experiencing with my five senses. When you take those few moments, maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's just a minute. All of those moments are helping you kind of reset your nervous system. And I recommend doing it throughout the day. The other thing I talk to my patients about all the time is bookending your day. So that sleep that you're struggling with is actually set by how you start your morning. And the best way to start your morning is outside in daylight. That helps reset your circadian rhythm. But the other thing that we often do first thing in the morning is we pick up our phones or we look at the news or we, you know, um, answer emails. And by starting our day with that energy, it's already setting our bodies up for stress. So easing into the day, maybe starting the day with a cup of coffee or a short walk, or maybe just a few minutes to, look outside, sit outside for a few minutes or look outside for a few minutes, setting the day that way. So starting the day that way, but also ending the day that way. So ending the day without your cell phone, because again, that blue light stimulates your circadian rhythm. So when we look at the sky, that blue light from the sky is the same as the blue light from the cell phone. So if we're looking at it before we go to bed, that is affecting our ability to sleep well. It's affecting our melatonin secretion. So really, we should not be on our phones or watching TV at least an hour before bedtime. Ideally, two. Two would be great. And having some kind of wind down routine so that you're not just, rushing through the day and then jumping into bed and saying, "Okay, it's time to sleep," kind of winding yourselves down. I heard somebody tell me this week, I was on a podcast this week, and she talked about, when we put our children to bed, we have this whole wind down routine, right? We do a bath, we read a book, we dim the lights, we do the whole thing. But as adults, we don't often do that. So even just, some kind of small routine before you go to bed that lets your body know, okay, it's okay to rest is important. So protecting that sleep is a really important stage with stress. Movement is a great thing when we tire our muscles out or we take a walk. That really is directly helps relax us. I talked about sleep is really important and community and connection. So spending some time to connect, you know, with people, with anybody in community. That community connection, again, we are wired to respond to the connection of other people. Of course, if those people are uh, don't induce stress. Avoid stressful people. But that's the key. But I should have said first, like the things that you can thin out, that you can get rid of, that you can take off your plate, do that. Because often I find as women, we think that we need to do everything. We don't need to do everything. It doesn't have to be done perfectly. We can let go of that perfection and let somebody else do it. And that is really important. That's probably number one with your managing your stress is doing that. But really take it seriously. We have got to take it seriously. Every single day, we need to take those moments for ourselves so that we can lower our stress because it really is killing us. So, um, and then, I talked about diabetes and the direct relation to the diabetes, but it really is diabetes and heart disease and dementia and our sleep, which leads to so many other things. And this is so important. So the key is you don't have to be perfect to heal. It's really about, and embracing and enjoying the moment, being present, and taking time for ourselves and being present. So, um, joyful medicine is not about optimizing under impossible conditions. It really is about finding what's genuinely doable, genuinely sustainable, genuinely yours, and building from there. It's progress is the mechanism. Joy is not the reward at the end. It is how healing happens. So I am actually doing a webinar today at noon. If you want to join me, but the uh, talking about beyond weight loss, reversing prediabetes. I'm going to go deep in um, about prediabetes, the underlying cause, and what we actually need to do to take control. If you are looking for community, Joyful Medicine Collective is open. You can join us there. We are going to be doing a mindfulness challenge next week. So feel free to join us inside. And I'm here every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Please join me and post your questions, future topics you'd like to hear. I would love to hear it. Okay. Have a great day. Thanks for joining me.